Welcome to the episode 5 of the Naval Aviation Podcast. Today we have a special guest who we were trying to figure out how we got connected, but Brian Burke's our guest today. He is an F-18 pilot, former. I like to say I'll never not be a naval aviator because I earned my wings and I ain't giving them back. But he was gracious enough to come on to our podcast today, and Brian Sorey, my co-host, is on, who's also an F-18 pilot. I am, on the other hand, a CH-46 driver and a civilian pilot, still to today. And so we'll go ahead and get started. And we kind of did this just on the fly. And I sent Brian an email on LinkedIn. He was gracious enough to reply and jump on with us. So we didn't get into details on your background, but I wanted to just touch on, we always like to go into, where did you start? How did you come to this love of aviation? And then talk a little bit about your own experiences in flying in the Navy.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me on. I do a lot of podcasts, actually. I usually talk about football and football analytics. That's my job now. Okay. Now I know where I'll tell you where we connected before. All right. Yeah. And, I'm on my probably third, fourth career now. But yeah, my first was, a Hornet guy. Let's see. Yeah. So I do a lot of podcasts. So I was really excited to do something a little different than that, and talk about the old days. I was a Academy guy, class of 93. Okay. Let's see. Whiting Field, VT-34, Meridian, flew T2s, VT-19. None of these things still exist. Kingsville, T-45s, which was kind of a new thing at the time. Yeah. And then out to Lemoore for F-18s. And that's where I did all of my fleet flying. VFA 113 fleet tour. I accepted a Navy post-grad assignment, which came along with a Naval Academy company officer tour, which I did for a couple of years. And then that was worse. I'd rather be behind the boat at night than that was the hardest job. Kids tried to get me fired every way you looked. I mean, I had friends fired. It was really rough. And General Allen was the commandant. If you know who he is, he became the 4-star. You may have seen him in the news. And then went back to Lemoore for as an IP in the RAG in Hornets, and I got out from there. So are you like an 11-year guy too, or did you do 20? Yeah, no, 11 and a half. So absolutely, it's, I wish, part of me regrets that decision greatly. I've even thought about going back into the Navy years later, even now, and doing something different, being an analyst, not being a pilot, or doing something totally different. I really miss it. I had no choice at the time. So I had some family issues, had to decide between trying to kill myself every night in Owens Valley or being a dad. So I think I totally relate. My story is so similar to that. It's scary for what it's worth. So yeah. Now, the thing that you did that I just want to tick off here on so you did a company officer job and got your master's degree at the same time? Yeah. So there was one of my old department heads had just become a placement officer in Tennessee and knew I was kind of an analytic type of guy. I was an academic guy. Thought they were desperate to get a pointy nose frontline fleet guy in a company officer job because it's a non-flying job, and usually guys like that have their choice of duty, and that's not one of them. I'm from Baltimore. I was desperate to get back to the East Coast, so Minneapolis was great. I wanted to go see the Orioles. And so he's like, hey, I know a guy who might actually take this job. And the package you did. Take it. Yeah, they said post-grad school. They had a program at the time. It was a 3-year deal. You did 1 year full-time Monterey and then 2-year company officer thing. Okay. And he said, we guarantee you, most guys who in that position got sent to dissociated sea duty immediately following that, prior to department head.
That's correct.
He said, which was kind of at the time, I look back on it and I was like, that's, we were just trying to avoid that like crazy. I wasn't an LSO. I wasn't a Top Gun guy. So I was one of those guys. I was going to have to be a shooter or fuels officer or something like that. And,
fuels officer.
And so they said, we will guarantee you instructor pilot duty in the RAG following the company officer thing. So
not bad.
It was like shore tour after shore tour, and then department head. So I was like, yeah, I'll do it. I'll take it.
That's a pretty sweet deal. I kind of, Brian, I noticed that we share the OR thing, and
oh yeah,
mine happened sort of accidentally. I was at N81, and the Army wanted a guy to go through their school. So I certainly didn't get it at the level you got it, but I did go through one phase of the Army's ORSA training.
Oh yeah, is that here in Virginia, right?
It is just south of Richmond.
Yeah, so I did an OR degree. After I got out, I used the GI Bill. Got another degree in operations research here outside DC at George Mason.
Oh, sure.
There's a lot of those Army guys, a lot of those guys that come through and are kind of part of all the OR community here in Northern Virginia.
Brian, I find that most people have never even heard of it. Would you give us kind of what is operations research?
Yeah, no, operations research is kind of a hybrid discipline. And it's kind of analytics before the buzzword analytics existed. So it's optimization, mathematical modeling, simulation, not simulators like you and I are used to, but simulation like Monte Carlo, kind of statistical simulation.
Game theory, probably, right?
A lot of game theory, yeah. And so it's this hybrid of economics and mathematics and computer science, so neural networks and things like that. So I'm in the field, I'm in football analytics. And that's been what I've been doing that for about 10, 12 years now. Mm-hmm. And, I learned a ton, but it was sort of self-taught. I wanted to learn more. I wanted to put an official stamp on it and made sure kind of increase my toolbox. So as part of my pivot from kind of quitting the day job to doing football full time, I went back to school, used GI Bill to do that. And, OR was just the perfect, discipline for that.
Mm-hmm.
Were you an athlete at the Naval Academy, or you were an athlete growing up at all, or did love sports?
No, love sports, definitely. Not an athlete. I am a, I have the mind of an athlete in a non-athletic body, unfortunately. So, flight fighters was kind of the perfect thing. As I tell people, you strap on an F-18 and everybody's a Cam Newton. And so what breaks us apart is our mind, and our ability to process information really quickly. So there's a little bit of overlap in sports. But no, I played football in high school, 4 years. I went to Towson High School, go Generals. But that's where it ended. And then I was an intramural warrior there in Annapolis for a few years.
So this is kind of interesting. I only know a couple people who are from Maryland who are Naval Academy folks. Isn't that one of the toughest competitions for the state of Maryland to get a nomination for the Naval Academy? It's like Northern Virginia too, actually.
Yeah, UVA. So Navy and UVA were were two of my top choices. Navy by far number one. I don't know. Like I was really attracted to the Navy for a lot of reasons, and one of the reasons was the Naval Academy had a high profile in Baltimore, and it was like if you couldn't think of you just couldn't come up with a more prestigious or
sure.
Whatever the hardest place is, that's what I wanted, and I can't explain why. To this day, like my kid, my son is just finished his junior year and he's talking about the academy off and on. And I'm like, I want you to make sure you really understand this, this is what you want. And
correct.
He can't explain it either. And I'm like, I couldn't explain it. I just,
Brian went to the Air Force Academy and I'm a graduate of Virginia Military Institute. So we all have that, what would you call it? A kind of, is it sadism or masochism?
Yeah. Got that stank on us. We got a little stank on us.
A little bit of both. So that's okay. I always ask because my nephew graduated from Navy 4 years ago, and he's a Marine infantry guy over in Afghanistan. And he got in because he was an awesome swimmer. So he had the swimming angle. Yeah. But it was super competitive coming out of Northern Virginia. He wasn't a super rocket scientist. He had good grades and good SATs, but he wasn't, in that top echelon.
Yeah. I think so I did my master's on the admissions process or partially on the admissions process.
Awesome.
And I learned a ton about how the Academy does their admissions. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure it's exactly the same now, but I know there's a lot of horse trading that goes on because, you have the congressional nominations but there are so many more people from, the Norfolk area or Northern Virginia or Maryland that want
legacies and Navy. Right. Just Navy folks. Yeah, I get that.
So they'll trade, the congressman from South Dakota, doesn't have.
He's got nobody. The one congressman from South Dakota. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
You don't have to talk about this if you don't want to, but a good friend of mine did a tour in the admissions office before going over to Johns Hopkins and doing his master's. And he'd get fighting mad about things that he experienced there at the Naval Academy regarding the admissions process. Apparently it's not all on the up and up. Can you speak to that at all or?
Well, it is. It's a very political thing by definition. Right. So there you go. I mean, that's
there you go. Okay.
It's political. It's designed to be. You got to deal with that. You can't have like an officer corps or at least an academy corps that is all one demographic or just based on
upper middle class white Catholics.
Yeah, so there are some valid reasons for some of the
sure.
stuff that gets involved. What people don't understand is a congressman will nominate 11 people for every one spot that's available, and that number one person is a primary nominee. And as long as that person meets the minimum requirements of the Academy, they're in. That's it. And then the other 10 people, and I was one of those, are alternate nominees, and they go into a competitive at-large pool. And most of the people that go to the academies are selected out of that competitive at-large pool. So I was not my congressman's primary. So I think those primaries folks are, where some of the problems lie. But yeah, I will email you my thesis. You'll be the second person to read it.
I'll give it a read. I noticed when you read your bio, it's analytics, except for that one stop at postgrad. That was a little out of line, but I'm sure it's somewhat valuable even now.
No, that's what taught me stats. So it's an MS in basically, we would call it management now, but the military likes to call it leadership, but management science maybe. And in order to make it an MS instead of an MA, there's a whole lot of hardcore statistics. We'd call it econometrics. Basically, planted the first seeds for a lot of the analytics I did. And I never thought about it again once I finished that degree. I was like, I'll never use all the statistics for anything. And then a few years later, after I was out of the Navy, I was in a water cooler argument with a buddy of mine, former SWO, and we're like, hey, does defense win championships? And we're going through this circular argument. And I just said, hey, you know what? I've got this software left over from grad school, stuff called SPSS. Let's download the stats. It's all online now, and we can answer this question. And that got me going. And then I never looked back. I started doing crunching numbers, looking at football ever since then.
And that's what you do 24/7 full time now, correct?
I am the senior analytics guy at ESPN for sports analytics, and I do that full time. And I had a website called advancedfootballanalytics.com. I did a lot of consulting for the pro NFL franchises and some other places, the league as well, and eventually got picked up full time for.
So did they acquire you, or did you just go get hired?
Both. So they gave me, they purchased all the intellectual property, the models and things I'd built, the tools I'd built, and brought me on full time at the same time.
Now, here's a couple of geek questions, just because I'm a computer nerd. What was your language of choice, just out of curiosity, or did you really care, or is it more just about modules or you running SPS kind of stuff?
Yeah, there's a language called R, just the letter R. Now
yep, I'm really familiar with that.
That is it's grown. It's great. The alternative now is Python. Back in early 2000s, there was like SAS and SPSS, but the kind of the cutting edge is moving away from those sorts of big proprietary software packages. And R is open source, and there's all these different, like you said, like modules you can load in. It can do everything. So that's
it's got those data types that are strong for handling, grids of data and batch and in bulk. And so I found it pretty good, although I'm a much bigger fan of Python just from a simplicity point of view. And it just seems to be a little easier to code in for whatever reason. I don't know, but that's been my experience.
I did not know how to code since college. I had to do some in college for engineering, but hadn't done anything. I was my squadron's PAO right when the internet was taking off, and the CO was like, "Hey, we got to have a website." So Burke, go make us a website. And I'm like, okay. And other than that, though, I just kind of picked it up I worked as a contractor later on in my most recent career here at Beltway Bandit outside DC. And just had a lot of spare time, and so it's kind of taught myself some of that stuff.
Brian, a guy recently shared an article on a guy named Bill Bentner. Have you heard of him?
No.
He was the first guy to figure out that he could use one of the very first IBM computers to bet on horses.
Oh,
and he wrote a little algorithm, and there's a pretty popular article out there on him right now.
Yes, I read it. Yeah.
The gambler that broke the code or something.
And he went to China and Vietnam and Philippines. Yeah. I read that article. Yeah, I actually tweeted that out. I loved it. It was, there's a lot of those articles where it's like guy has system beats the system, but, and it's just a bunch of bunk, but this one was really good, really interesting.
It was good. And one thing I found fascinating, cause I listened to Wharton Moneyball a lot. Love their work. And Bill Bentner said regarding baseball, he tried it briefly and he goes, "There's just too many variables. I can't predict it accurately." So.
Horses, it's kind of one dimensional. It's horse speed, maybe conditions and stuff like that. So actually, one of the things I'm working on today is the gambling restrictions were lifted, and so we're preparing. We're trying to get ready. We're building models for not just predicting who's going to win the game outright, but what's the probability they're going to beat the spread or beat an over under. And so I'm building my model. That's what I'm doing today, is building models for those things for the NFL.
Very cool.
That's nuts. That's crazy.
Very cool.
Yeah, I've been a bit of followed some of the gambling and internet kind of businesses over the years. The guys down in Costa Rica that Ben Mesrich wrote about, the beating Vegas guys and stuff like that. That's always really interesting. But actually the other thing I wanted to ask you though, before we move along here, is just going back to the Navy, as looking back on it, just out of curiosity, do you what you've learned now, if you could bring it, like you talked about going back to the Navy, what do you think you could bring back with the skills you've developed, this kind of really hyper-focused analytics capability? And just like if you went back to a squadron or whatever, went back to the boat, what could that bring to the day-to-day life to make a squadron more efficient, or even a ship or something? Did you have maybe thought about that possibly?
Well, sure. The day-to-day biggest headache operationally is next day's schedule. and the schedules officer has a 20-hour-a-day job. And so those things could be, operations research is the ideal. That's kind of what it is kind of what's the optimum schedule given all these myriad of constraints.
Right.
And hey, this guy, he needs an air to ground mission, in his training matrix, but he's a level 2 wingman, and the range is only open this time to this time, but he flew last night. It's so impossible. It's amazing. It really is a minor daily miracle every day that these schedzos can put these things out. So those things could be at least partially automated and optimized to make that person's job much easier. And if you can fill up your training matrix in a month rather than in 2 months, then that would really help things. But I can't say that honestly, it's a different job. Like if I were an XO or CO, your job is people and managing people, and not that stuff. And you leave that stuff to those people, to the analysts and that sort of thing, and not try to I wouldn't. I guess the answer is I wouldn't really do anything, but I could see a lot of potential for that. The flight deck management stuff. They're using these bolts and screws and things and moving them around on these cardboard cutouts on flight deck control. And it's a great story. Like, hey, this stuff works. The tried and true works, and so let's not take a big chance on trying to get like a 1% or 2% improvement out of the system,
right?
While we're taking a chance that it's not going to work at all, or really it's going to be some kind of fragile system that can break in some way we can't foresee right now. So that's one of the things I really learned is that I look at football. And it's a super complex system. You think baseball has 24 base out states. Football has more game states than there are atoms in the universe. Really, you start doing the math, and it's incredibly complex. So it's no wonder these coaches can't really optimize. Like, should we punt? Let's just punt. Like, I don't know. Let's just punt. So that's kind of, and so they fall back on the tried and true. The book. Right. Passed down, and a guy like me comes along and I say, no, I can figure out when you should go for it on fourth down, when you should punt, when you should kick. And they're still very hesitant. And there's a reason for that. Very, very, very complex systems where the price of failure is extreme. Falling back on the tried and true is sometimes the wisest choice. So that's maybe the little bit of wisdom I would bring back into that job.
Yeah, it's funny because the one thing, the thing that actually got me into graduate school or got the XO to send me to Navy postgrad was a training matrix spreadsheet I wrote that would update automatically and show a colored coding of all the, there was no color back then, but it would highlight in bold all the people that were due for flights for specific ops and stuff like that. So yeah, that's kind of cool. And so what he said was, he goes, and I didn't realize, I barely graduated college, so that was kind of funny. He goes, but we're going to send you to PT school because you wrote this spreadsheet. I was like, XO, I don't know if that's such a hot idea. But ironically, it turned out really well because I had a good time in Monterey and learned a ton. And now I work full-time in the software business, and it's been very beneficial.
Yeah, so I've got two cool stories for you. It's like kind of that foreshadowed my development into just a football analyst, like very math oriented, and even as a pilot. So one of the first things I did, there's this thing called Terra Server, which was Microsoft thing, or eventually Microsoft bought it, but this is maybe before that, and it was kind of like Google Earth, but before that. And we had all these like strike missions. We had to go to training missions in Fallon, Bravo 17, and in other working areas. And I would take that overhead imagery of those target areas right offline, and then I put them into there was this like $10 million kind of like computer, some kind of thing, process system that would show you like what your target would look like through your FLIR at 10 miles, at 20 miles, 15 miles, right? But it was, they're paying some contractor millions and millions and millions of dollars. But I'm like, well, we can do this on a PC. Let's just take this Google Earth snapshot basically, and put it into Microsoft Office and then just do this kind of transformation type thing. And it just kind of scrunches down and makes it look like how it will look in your flare. We had these templates, these big trapezoid templates we would put out on like the the ONCs, the charts, and and then try to even draw by hand these things. And so I'm like, yeah, we can just do this little mathematical transformation on this image. It's a top down image, but now we can make it kind of look like it's at this angle. Like we'll be at 24,000.
Oh, that's great.
Wow. And I would hand this out and, for strikes, and, it would take 15 minutes. So that was fun. The other thing is, we're at Fallon and we're doing, this air wing exercise, big deal. It's kind of this simulated war, right? And they have this, this FIBA, this front line, you're not supposed to go beyond this at certain altitudes or you're an automatic kill. Right. And we're supposed to be doing a CAS mission. And that
would be close air support, correct?
Yeah, close air support. And we have laser guided training rounds on our wings. And it was one of these like Mission Impossible things. Like we couldn't get to the target area without being an automatic kill, because there's this like upside down layer cake, wedding cake of
airspace
threats and stuff. And so we got this CAS mission, and I realized, right, remember from like middle school algebra, there's always two solutions to a parabola.
Yes.
And so I did a lofted delivery of an LGTR, because right, you don't have to be. You don't have to. You just have to put it in the basket, right? Like, and I did it.
So you have to explain what a lofted delivery is for our folks, because
I'm not comfortable with that now. And
it was. I was told it was illegal, but it wasn't. It wasn't like vertically lofted. It was to the side, so we couldn't go above a certain altitude at a certain, because of this.
Slung it like it.
And so I just kind of broke right, I guess, as I released, and shacked the target, and he came back, and I'm like, damn, man, that 6th grade algebra came in handy after all. I got the guys who really know better, the strike the weapons school guys who are there like, no, you can't do that. It's it's not.
But I just did it.
It hasn't been flight tested, and so the answer is, well, now it has.
But
it worked.
The irony of that is, that was a strategy back in the day, though. They would come in
for nukes.
You pull up 45 or 50, and then boop, and turn around and haul ass.
That's literally the first time I've ever heard of a slung delivery for a PGM. That's tremendous.
That's great.
I think it's because it's a real bad idea. If you have like a bent fin or something like that, it's not a good idea. Yeah.
That's still pretty good, though. Do you
remember? So I was always the nerd of the squadron ever since. Yeah.
That's awesome.
So just out of curiosity, what was the response to your unique weapon delivery from your compadres in the squadron?
Oh, man.
Oh, yeah. Everybody said, don't do that again, but I think, but they were happy that there's one more target off the list, I guess, of the battle order battle.
Right. That's a great story. Since you're a carrier pilot, I have to ask you this. Do you remember your night in the barrel if you had?
Oh, yeah. I had one. I had mine.
Give me the where and when and conditions out of curiosity.
I think it was night, SoCal, workups.
Okay.
So we're off the coast of Southern California. We're getting ready for deployment. We're doing our practice stuff. It's night, as all of these are. And I had a kind of vertigo where it felt like I was landing like a helicopter. So it felt like the deck was coming up on me completely vertically. Like I was falling directly down upon the deck. And so I felt really, really steep coming in, and I naturally would goose the throttles a little bit to flatten out the descent. That was just natural for me to do. And as I did that, I would shoot straight over the wires and bolt it. And I got low on gas, and I actually started getting angry because I heard the call for the S3 to what's the word? Not shadow or hawk me, or what was the word?
I think it's hawk.
Yeah,
hawk.
like they would say like Hawk 312, and I. F you guys! I'm gonna like go. Go to hell. I got this.
Right.
So I could see that green strobe. That kind of siren strobe that's rotating. I could see that green thing up in the corner of my eye at 1 o'clock, just like right there if I need it. And sure enough, I bolted one more time, and I needed the gas, and they were right there where they're supposed to be. Got the gas. Once I got the gas, it all stopped, came together, and had a good. Had a good I don't know, probably a 4-wire, but it was that's all you need.
Did you ever cross paths with a guy named Rob Logren, Rooster? I think he was a Stinger JO. I wasn't sure if you guys were about the same time frame.
The name sounds a little bit familiar, but we never crossed paths in the same unit. No.
He was later my skipper in VFA 151.
Now, before you jumped on, Brian, sorry, I was mentioning to Brian that we were commenting on the fact that he was connected to Commander Fravor, and we were talking about how I was telling him how I've watched that Carrier documentary, that tip pitching deck bit, probably a dozen times.
Yeah.
And then the Tucker Carlson interview when he's talking about the UFOs. So we were just, I don't know what it is. It's just I watched it again, the whole UFO story. And what I would love to do is like have someone come up with a simulator, do a simulator bit where someone's in the UFO and someone's in a jet, and actually do it in a simulator. I think that would be cool. I don't know if it would serve any purpose, but it just might be interesting.
I like showing people the interview and then asking them their opinion. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
The mix of responses, it's tremendous.
Yeah, but like if you know Dave Fravor and you know what you're looking at on a FLIR, you are taking that seriously. It is really spooky thing, really spooky, and I don't know where to go from there. But kind of like it was a feeling I remember as I thought about it more, like why are we worried about this Donald Trump thing and Russia, or why are we worried about anything else? Like this should be the thing we're all like North Korea.
Yeah.
Hey, there's something really weird going on here, and whatever the explanation is, it's going to change things. If it's the Chinese with some kind of drone vehicle or something, that's going to redefine how we look at things. So whatever it is, it's very, very strange. And you can even listen to the audio. Like I know you're looking at a B scope on an F-18, and there's one point where I can't remember which of the pilots says, "Hey, there's hundreds of them, and they're all drifting east into the wind."
Oh, I didn't hear that. That's right.
But we know there's only one of these objects, seen at a time. But as an F-18 guy, like, oh, that's jamming. I know what that is. That's noise jamming. Or barrage, that's barrage jamming. That's what the B scope on F-18 looks like, synthetic. It's maybe there's one real object there, but it looks like there's 1,000 of the same thing in slightly different positions, and they're all going the same way, same day. So I'm like, oh, just from hearing the audio, you can kind of, I think the general public doesn't get the full picture of exactly what's happening.
Okay. Well, it's an absolutely fascinating story, and I don't know where to put it in my brain because it's cool and terrifying and a whole bunch of things all at once. And because growing up, UFOs were always just a thing that we made fun of people for. Like you don't believe in UFOs. I mean, there's objects that have been flying that are identified, but there's no space aliens coming down and anal probe anyone or any of that stuff,
Well, as pilots, we've seen on a day-to-day basis really strange things and reflections and odd cloud formations and parachute flares and all kinds of things on it all the time, and water reflections off the water. I one time almost ejected because of the moon. I saw the moon pop out of the clouds, and I thought it was a Prowler with the Prowler has that big round single landing light on the nose gear. Sure. I thought it was a Prowler because there was a Prowler coming in on final, and there's this green guy in CATSI controlling me, and I'm on downwind, and then on base, and at the same time I can hear the prowler coming in on final, and I'm like, he's going to vector me right into this prowler, and pops out of the clouds. I see this big white round light, and I'm like, there it is, there's that prowler, and I reach for the handle, and it was the moon.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, that was I almost ejected because of the moon.
That's hilarious. We were down at it's funny how what your brain sees and how you process it. We were sitting on the helo pads in Imperial Beach, which is right on the border of San Diego and Mexico, and that's where the helo guys train. And I was with my buddy Jay Bowman. We were doing a night dick around flight. We take off, we transition to a forward flight, and there's a huge light. And we both look at each other. We're like, did you see that? I go, I think I saw it, but it was out of the corner of our eye. We kept flying a little bit more out to sea, and it was a pretty dark night. It was actually a really dark night. And then we see another one, and it was actually a boat in distress. But when your brain's not ready for something, you're not sure what to do, which I totally get. Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, so we know that 1 million out of 1 million UFO sightings are just illusions and things we don't quite understand. Except
Correct.
This is really weird. They had that cruiser, and there were, I think, 3 different F-18s that made contact at some point. I think
it was the Princeton was the CG down there, and there was a carrier, because I think he mentioned, or they were just operating off the coast, I forget, but I think there was a carrier there too, and they were actually operating off the boat. Yeah.
So Fravor and I think there were, I don't know, I think there's a total of 3 F-18s, 2 of which were F models. So there's like 5 total people that witnessed this thing at separate occasions too.
It was over a 2-week period.
Right.
Or something, I think. That's
and if you know Sex Fravor, Commander Dave Fravor, if you know him, and we were talking about this before we started recording, if you know him, he's a serious guy. He is an aviator's aviator, and he's not into conspiracies or tinfoil stuff or sci-fi stuff. He's just an aviator's aviator. So a lot of experience there, but so
great.
That's a very, very strange thing. They'll probably make a movie about it one day.
Oh, I hope so.
I hope so.
So we're coming up at the end, because I wanted to keep. I went over a couple of times on our podcast, so I'm trying to keep our game tight. So we want to keep it under an hour.
I don't know if it'll ever get tight. But
I don't think so either.
Tight-ish.
So Brian, the first of all, I totally repressed my instinct to talk about football, so I'm still not going to do it because this is about naval aviation. But I believe I was doing some research on analytics, and somehow I got your name, and I think I called you or emailed you like 5 years ago. I think that's why you're on our LinkedIn box.
Okay.
I work in kind of data collection. I do a lot of data collection stuff for my gig, and that's probably where it was. I was looking for help for how to do analytics on large data sets and da-da-da. So
yeah.
But this is great. All right. So the one thing I was going to ask you though, and you brought it up, was the gambling changes, which is interesting. So we'll see how that plays out. Yeah. Anything to plug since you're on here? Not that we get that many views yet.
I haven't been a lot. I write a lot. I do a lot of analysis at ESPN. I haven't written in months actually. So we've got some very, very exciting stuff coming up with player tracking data. So now there are chips. Just like we had those tax pods, right, in our aircraft. Now the players basically have tax pods, so we know their position, velocity, orientation, direction, acceleration.
Oh my
so
God.
It's this weird. So now, and we're using artificial neural nets to kind of make sense of everything, and so it's kind of this mix of my old job. Where you've got vectors and routes and things like that. And I look at these route combinations and things, and I see red air tactics, essentially. Very deceptive. One guy's supposed to get the ball, and the other guys, on these routes are really just designed to deceive, the blue air. And that's kind of the same thing when I look at football plays. So there's this strange overlap. Back to
before you go, I just want to interrupt real briefly. Can you characterize? This is actually more for me than any of our potential audience members. Characterize for me what neural nets provide. Maybe in comparison to what other techniques for doing prediction, or just the benefit of it in general. I think I mostly know because we're using it to do predictive analysis on the performance of software. But I would just like to get your take on it, since you're way more advanced than.
Sure. I mean, you've heard about like a regression, okay, where you've got some, maybe a scatter plot.
Right.
You have a linear line that goes through, so you fit an intercept and a slope to those points and things like that. Now, imagine like a network of regressions. So instead of just one, that handles a very, very simple system really well. Right. But now you have a much, much more complex system. Let's say, like an autonomous vehicle. And am I looking at a stop sign or a red light? Well, that's a much more complex picture than just a little scatter plot. And so you don't need one regression. You need an entire network of regressions. And it's not exactly how the brain works, but there's a lot of parallels to that's why they call it a neural network. It learns over time. So you feed it the data. You feed it the data over and over and over and over, and it makes a guess. And if it's wrong, it kind of moves the answer in the right direction. If it's right, then those connections between those neurons are reinforced, and you just do this over and over and over. The thing with neural nets is that they are amazingly good predictors with really complex systems, right. But you don't quite understand why it's making the prediction that it is. So it's a bit of a black box, but so is the human brain, really.
And it could be, and let me just take your analogy. So let's say it's an N array or an N list or an N thing of regressions, but it's not even linear. It could be some really crazy, right? And
so it's a deep network. Imagine like a matrix of individual little regressions all connected together by coefficients. I know we're getting really geeky, but
I can get us off the geek because this one's.
Well, I really wanted to know. That's all. And I'm on the call. That's why.
Hey, I work with a gal who I'm going to send this to, and she's going to love that. But Brian, is there a coach that, in your opinion, makes the most consistently good decisions? If we were to run Belichick through a machine learning.
Yeah. Belichick would not be that. Right. He's inconsistent. He's not analytically oriented the way people make it out.
Right.
I would say that of Baltimore, John Harbaugh, and Philadelphia, Peterson, are the two most consistent, kind of process-oriented, kind of scientifically minded decision makers.
The scenario suggests we should do this, and that's what we do.
They don't always do what the numbers exactly tell them, but they have trust in the process of rather than just outcome kind of oriented stuff. So yeah, like I was talking about, football is really conservative, kind of the decisions are made based on what they were handed down from coaches generations ahead of them. And so there's this kind of unwritten book of rules of what to do, how to make decisions. And they're very reluctant to deviate from that. But there are some, younger coaches that are, have a different perspective, more analytical mind. And Baltimore was probably the first team to, other than Jacksonville, but Baltimore, I think, has had more success.
Okay, last two questions. I just thought of them. I think they might be interesting. The shortest answer possible. What do you think of the guy that never goes for it on fourth down every time? That guy.
Yeah, talking to him yesterday. Coach Kelly, Kevin Kelly, from Pulaski Academy in Arkansas. Yeah. So he came up with his kind of policy before all the numbers said he should. And so he's a bit extreme on the other end, where
Right.
he never punts, always onside kicks, always goes for 2 points. So here's one reason that really, really works in high school football, but in the pros, it's not going to work so well. So if there were a team in the pros going for it on 4th down every time, I'd be the first guy that says, no, you need to punt here and here and here. But in high school, there's limited practice time. And so, you have offense, defense, and special teams, but special teams is not one thing. There are 6 special teams, like kickoff return, punt return, kick defense, right? So you have to split all that up and practice, all that stuff over and over and over. And they're not really good at it. So the kickers are not very good. The punters are not very good. You're not gaining very much by doing that, as compared to going for it. So if you take all that practice time that you would otherwise be wasting on those 6 different disciplines and instead just get really, really, really good at your bread and butter, then and on top of that, in many, if not most cases, the optimum decision would be, to go ahead and be very aggressive like that. So, all those things taken together leads to a lot of success at the high school level. Now, as you get higher and higher and higher in the towards the pros, into college and then into the pros, that would become less and less successful.
Gotcha. All right. And then the last one, this is totally off the rails, but it's something that's been bugging me. The basketball season. Are you familiar with the Elam ending in basketball? The guy that came up with the point spread ending with you come out into 4 minutes, you take out the timer, and
you play to 10 more points, or like first team to 10 more points wins, or first team or 10 more points than what the leading team currently has.
That's correct. Yeah, it's 7 points plus whatever the leading team has. Yeah.
Just thought that would be great.
Okay.
But for as an ESPN employee whose bonus relies on high ratings, I would say I'm not sure. That would make games end quicker, and it would also give us less opportunities to sell you beer and Ford pickup trucks. So
it takes all the timeouts away, and those buzzer beaters are.
As a fan, it's genius. There's a lot of really great ideas like that. I like that. I appreciate good ideas like that.
Well, Brian, we thank you. Oh, Brian,
I'm not. You closed with 2, man. I'm throwing one in, and this. So
it's Friday, bro, and it's past 5.
I know. I'm sorry, Brian.
Texas time. That's why.
So I live in Houston. I think Commander Fravor also lives in Houston.
Yeah.
So if you talk to him, let him know I'm going to stay on him. But like 5 times this year, I've seen the Stros stack all 4 infielders between one base. And separately, I heard that they have the Cubs and the Indians have really advanced analytics departments, and they're doing these hyper aggressive shifts more than any team I've ever seen. And I don't watch every Stros game, so if I've seen it 5 times, it's happening really frequently. So do you know much about like what's driving because that's got to be spooky as a coach to say, stick them all in there between first and second.
That's what, they really trust the numbers. There's a reason the Astros are really, they've got NASA right there in Houston actually. And there's some astrophysicists that are part of that organization, and no joke. And they, but you don't need to be an astrophysicist to know, like you can look at these, what they call spray charts, basically a heat map of where certain players have certain tendencies. And you would be willing to, I'm an Orioles fan, right? So we got Chris Davis, who's about to break the record for the worst season ever. And part of the reason is because they shift
pull hitter only, right?
Yeah, he cannot hit to the opposite side.
Right.
And so he either strikes out or hits a home run, and cannot get a hit because of those shifts. And so maybe 10 years ago, he would have had a very different career, but because of those, because of that analysis, it really works. So the Astros do it top to bottom. So game management stuff, game tactics, and then personnel management is roster selection and how much to offer certain players and how much they're worth. All those things are all analytically based and from top to bottom, and it shows. Yeah, it's paid off for them big.
Yeah,
great.
They're fun to watch.
Well, Brian, we're going to close, but we really appreciate you taking the time to come on. I honestly didn't catch the whole, you mentioned you did football analytics, but that's a whole nother thing. That's really cool. So we know you're busy and we appreciate the time. I live in Northern Virginia, so if I can ever buy you dinner, I'd love to do that at some point. Maybe if Brian comes to town, we can do a little reunion.
Yeah, no, always up for that.
Well, thanks so much. And this concludes episode 5. It was a privilege. Brian Sorey, thanks so much for jumping on from Texas. And Brian Burke, thank you so much. And we'll talk to you soon. All right.
Brian. Bye.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.